Even wild cowboys need a home, said the lonely homesteader after he guarded her all winter. The axe handle had a crack in it I'd wrapped with wet rawhide 2 summers back, and every morning I picked it up I thought about replacing it. Never did. That morning I was splitting kindling behind the Draper barn when the woman came around the corner with a rifle leveled at my chest, and I thought, there it is. That's the axe handle coming due. She didn't say a word, just held the gun on me, barrel steady, eyes taking me in one piece at a time. Brown coat, trail worn, alone, axe in hand. I set the axe down against the stump, slow, and held both palms out where she could see them. I'm not here for trouble, I said. Nobody who comes in October is here for trouble, she said. They're here because they're cold, and they figure a widow won't put up a fight. She was wrong on the second count. The rifle told me that. She had the stock seated right, shoulder back, not the way a woman holds a gun, who's only picked one up twice. Whoever had taught her well. I'm Calhoun, I said. Nate Calhoun. I came through the Yellowhorn Pass 2 days ago, heading west. My horse threw a shoe on the rocks up near the ridgeline, and I had to walk her down. I smelled the smoke from your chimney. You smelled my chimney and figured what? Figured I'd ask about a farrier, or if I could work a few days for board while the shoe gets set. She didn't lower the rifle. Her eyes went to my horse, tied at the far post, head dropped, one hind leg cocked. She looked at the horse a long time. She's lame, she said. Walking on shale without a shoe for 2 miles does that. Another silence. The wind pushed down from the ridge and brought wood smoke with it, and something else, the front edge of cold moving in from the north. I'd smelled it coming since the night before. There's no farrier within 30 miles, she said. Nearest town is Brackett's Ford, and the smithy there drinks himself blind from the first snow until March. I know how to set a shoe. Do you? I do. She lowered the rifle then, not all the way barrel to the ground, but her hand stayed on the stock. She looked at me again, the same taking stock look. My name is Maren Voss, she said. My husband built this place and died in it 3 years ago. I have been running it alone since then. I have 2 milk cows, a dozen chickens, a lame mule, and 40 acres of hard ground that I have been trying to put a second wheat crop into for 2 years. I do not need a man to run this farm. I need a man who can do what I tell him, when I tell him, without arguing or drinking or putting his hands where they don't belong. Can you do that? I almost smiled. Didn't. Yes, ma'am, I said. You'll sleep in the barn. There's a cot in the tack room. It's dry. That's fine. You start by fixing the fence on the east pasture. 3 rails down. The cows keep getting into the wheat stubble, and I don't have enough hay to let them burn through it grazing where they shouldn't. She turned and walked back toward the house without waiting for an answer. I watched her go. She walked like a woman who had not waited for anyone's answer in a long time. I fixed the fence that afternoon. 3 rails down was 4. Once I got a look at the east corner post, it had rotted through at the base and needed pulling and resetting, which meant digging in ground that was already starting to freeze at the top inch. It took until near dark. When I came in, Maren had left a plate on the porch steps, beans and a piece of cornbread and a cup of coffee, covered with a cloth against the cold. She didn't come out. I ate on the steps and watched the last light go off the ridge, and thought about the winter I'd just walked into. I had not meant to stay. That's the honest thing. I'd been moving west for 2 years, not running from anything specific, just unable to stop. Some men are like that. They go until something stops them. I had been through 4 territories, worked 3 cattle drives, spent a winter in a mining camp in Colorado that I'd rather not think on. I was 41 years old, and I owned a horse, a bedroll, a good rifle, and a coat that was one hard winter from giving out. I thought about that fence post I dug and reset in the frozen ground, and felt something settle in my chest. I didn't have a name for it then. I set my horse's shoe the next morning. Her name was Della. She was 11 years old, and she had carried me without complaint since I'd bought her off a drover in Kansas 4 years back. The left forefoot had a shallow crack in the hoof wall from the shale. Not bad enough to go lame on again if I kept her off rock for a week. I packed the crack with pine tar and set the shoe, and told her she was lucky I knew what I was doing. Maren came out while I was working. She stood with her arms folded and watched. "You do know what you're doing," she said. Told you. Men say a lot of things. I didn't argue that. I finished with Della's hoof, set her foot down, ran my hand along her leg checking the tendons. You were heading west, Marin said. Where exactly? Oregon, maybe? Montana. Hadn't settled on it. You don't have somewhere waiting for you. It wasn't a question. I answered it anyway. No. She was quiet for a moment. I heard the wind in the eaves of the barn. Winter is coming in early, she said. The Shoshone man who trades with me came through last week. He said the elk are already moving down from the high country. That's a hard winter sign. I know. I have a list of work, she said. The barn roof has 2 bad sections. The root cellar door needs rehinging. The south fence is worse than the east. I just haven't gotten to it. There's 1.5 cords of wood in the shed, but I need 4 cords to get through to March, and the timber is 1/2 mile up the slope. The chimney in the house needs new mortar on the east joints before it starts drawing cold air instead of letting smoke out. She paused. I am telling you this because if you are going to be here, I would rather know now that you are staying until it is done. I cannot have a man start the barn roof and leave when it suits him. I looked at her. She was watching me with that steady, measuring look she had. She was maybe 35. Her hair was dark, pulled back plain. She had a quality of stillness about her that I recognized, not calm, exactly. More like a person who had learned to hold very still, so nothing cracked. I'll stay through winter, I said. If the work holds, the work will hold, she said, and went back inside. That was the first week of October. I started on the barn roof the next morning. The 2 bad sections weren't bad. They were gone. The planking had rotted through, and the tar paper under it was torn loose, and the rafters below were wet and starting to soften. I pulled the rotten wood and stacked it for burning, and went to the timber for fresh planking. Marin's mule, whose name was apparently Porter, though she never explained where that came from, was big and stubborn, and had a hitch in his right shoulder that made him walk crabwise when loaded. We came to an understanding. He pulled. I didn't argue with him about direction, as long as we ended up at the same place. The first snow came on the 8th of October. Just a skiff an inch, maybe, but it sat on the ground and didn't go away. The sky stayed the color of old tin. I had the roof done by the 10th, started on the south fence the 11th, got half of it rebuilt before the second snow hit. This one had weight to it. 8 inches overnight, and the temperature dropped, and the creek at the base of the south pasture froze solid, which told me something about the cold coming. Marin fed the cows in the mornings. I got up before first light and split wood by lamplight. You could get an hour in before the cold made the axe bounce off the frozen rounds, then went to whatever the day's work was. She cooked, morning and evening. Left my plate on the steps the first week. Then one morning she just said, "Come inside." And I did. And after that, I ate at the kitchen table. We didn't talk much at meals. She wasn't unfriendly. She was just a woman who had been alone a long time and had gotten used to her own thinking. I was the same way. We ate, and she'd sometimes say something about the day's work or ask about the fences, and I'd answer, and that was mostly it. Her husband's name had been Ebbe Voss. Swedish. I gathered from the last name. She never talked about him except in practical terms. Ebbe put that corner post in green, which is why it rotted. Or, Ebbe's harness is in the back, but the left billet strap needs replacing. I didn't ask. A man who pried at a widow's grief was a man who had no sense. There was a photograph of him on the mantel. Taken outdoors, you could tell the light was hard, and he'd had to hold still so long he looked stiff. Big man, wide through the shoulders, hands like mauls. He looked serious in the way men look serious in photographs, because they're trying not to move. I thought he probably had a different face in real life. I hoped so. For her sake. By the 3rd week of October, I had the south fence done and the chimney remortared. The root cellar door was a full day's work. The old hinges had been set into wood that had swelled and then cracked, and I had to cut new mortises and fit new iron, which meant a trip to Brackett's Ford for hardware. Marin came with me. It was the first time I'd been off the property since I arrived. We went in her wagon. She drove, and the road was frozen hard, and the trees on the slope above the creek had gone bare. She drove the way she did everything, steady, and without wasted motion. In town, I got the iron I needed, and a square of oilcloth for the tack room window, which had no glass and had been letting cold air in all night. Marin went to the dry goods store. I waited outside with the wagon and watched the town. Brackett's Ford was maybe 200 people, the kind of place that had grown up fast around a mill and a freighting stop, and never quite solidified into something permanent. Half the buildings had that unfinished look, like somebody had meant to add a second story and got distracted. Two men came out of the saloon while I was standing there. They looked at me, then at Marin's wagon, and one of them said something to the other. They went on down the street. I watched them go. Something about the way they'd looked at the wagon bothered me in a way I couldn't name yet, and I filed it. When Marin came out of the dry goods store, she had a sack of flour and a paper-wrapped parcel and 2 tins of something. I loaded them for her. She climbed up on the wagon seat and gathered the reins and looked at the street. "The Alden brothers," she said, without me asking. "The 2 men. Yes, they've been pushing on the west boundary since last spring. There's 120 acres of good grass up there that was part of Ebby's original claim. They say the title is disputed. It isn't. I have the paperwork. Have they made trouble? They took down a fence in July. I put it back up. In August they ran 40 head of their cattle through the wheat stubble. I told them if they did it again I'd shoot the cattle." She picked up the reins. I wasn't joking. "No," I said. "I didn't think you were." We drove back without much more said. But I thought about the way those 2 men had looked at the wagon. The way a man looks at something he already thinks is his. November came in gray and mean. The temperature dropped to single digits the first week, and stayed there. I got the woodpile to 4 cords by the 10th, which took every morning. I had for 2 weeks. The timber on the slope was good, dry standing deadfall, and there was plenty of it. But hauling it down in the snow with a crabwise mule in single-digit cold is the kind of work that puts hair on your soul, or takes it off, depending on the man. I came in some evenings, and my hands wouldn't fully close, and I'd hold them over the stove for 10 minutes before I could grip a fork. Marin noticed. She didn't say anything about it, but one morning there was a pair of heavy wool gloves on the table where my coffee cup usually sat, and they weren't mine. I held them for a moment, turned them over. They were a man's gloves, big in the hand, thick woven. "Ebby's," she said from the stove, not turning around. "He had large hands. They'll fit you better than whatever you've been wearing." I put them on. "They fit well enough." "Thank you," I said. She nodded and went back to the stove. I wore them every day after that. When I split wood, I could feel the grain through them. The crack in the axe handle was still there. The 3rd week of November, the chickens started dying. Not from cold, the henhouse was banked with straw and holding heat fine. Something was getting in. Marin found the first 3 one morning. Heads taken, not eaten, just killed and left. Fox maybe, or a weasel. I went over the henhouse inch by inch and found the gap, a rotted board at the base of the north wall, just big enough. I patched it with fresh timber and set 2 traps nearby. Caught a weasel the first night. Small and vicious, like a little piece of mean. The killing stopped. Marin came out to look at the trap in the morning. Looked at the weasel. Looked at the patched board. "How to get in?" she said. Rotted board at the base. North wall. She studied the repair. Her expression was the same one she always wore. Measuring. Unreadable. Then she said, "I've been over that henhouse a dozen times and never found it. It was down at the base, behind the feed shelf. You'd have to be on your hands and knees in the straw." She looked at me then. Not the measuring look, something else. Brief. "Thank you," she said. I pulled the trap and reset it 20 feet away in case there were more. There weren't. There is a thing that happens between 2 people who work the same ground through hard weather. It isn't friendship exactly. Or not only that, it's more like the way a rope gets tested. You pull against it hard enough, long enough, in enough different directions, and eventually you know whether it holds. By December, I knew that Marin Voss held. She was up before me some mornings, out feeding the cows in the dark. She could fix a broken trace chain, and she could do accurate arithmetic in her head, and she could tell weather by the way the horses stood in the pasture. She had a system for everything on that farm, and the system was good, not perfect, but thought through, adjusted over years. And she was alone with all of it in a way that had gone past tired into something quieter and more permanent. I understood that kind of tired. You stop noticing it after a while. It just becomes the shape of your life. I didn't think about leaving anymore. That surprised me some. I'd always thought the staying still feeling would come with restlessness, like a horse in a too small pen. It didn't. The work was too hard and too continuous for restlessness. Every day had its demands, and I met them and went to bed, and the days piled up and I stopped counting them. Christmas came through without much ceremony. Marin made a venison stew and a pie with dried apples, and I'd brought back a small bottle of whiskey from Brackett's Ford on my last run for hardware. We drank a small glass each at the kitchen table after supper, and she told me about Sweden. She'd come over as a girl. Didn't remember much of it, except cold and flat gray water, and her mother's hands. Your husband was Swedish too, I said. We met on the boat, she said. We were both 12. We didn't come to the same place. His family went to Minnesota. Mine to Illinois. We wrote letters for 20 years before we found each other again. She turned her glass in her hands. He always said the land was what he wanted. A piece of ground you could call yours. We tried Illinois first. The soil was good, but the weather was wrong for him, he said. Too humid. He wanted dry and open. He found it. He did. She looked at the table. He died here, which means he found what he was looking for and got to keep it a while. A lot of men don't even get that far. I thought about that. What was he like? I asked. First time I'd asked. She considered. Stubborn, patient, not always in the right order. The corner of her mouth moved. He could do anything with his hands. Built this house, this barn, the fences, most of it himself. He used to say a man who couldn't fix his own things wasn't a free man. He wasn't wrong. No. She finished her whiskey. He wasn't wrong about much. He was wrong about the east field. He thought the slope was enough for drainage. But it isn't. It pools in a wet spring. I've lost 2 plantings to it. But I don't hold that against him. I laughed. She looked up, a little startled, like she'd forgotten laughing was a thing that could happen. Then she smiled, and it changed her whole face. And I looked down at the table because it wasn't my business to keep looking at it. The Alden brothers came in January. I heard them before I saw them, 2 horses coming up the road fast. The sound of it rang in the silence of the frozen morning. I was at the woodpile, and I set down the axe and went to the corner of the barn where I could see the road. 2 riders. Big men, both of them, one with a dark beard and one without. The bearded one was the older. They pulled up in the yard and sat their horses, and the bearded one called out, "Mrs. Voss." I moved along the barn wall, quiet, to where my rifle was leaned inside the door. Marin came out onto the porch. She had her own rifle. I noticed she'd had it in her hand before she opened the door. She'd heard them coming too. "Mr. Alden," she said. Not a greeting, just a name. "We've come to talk about the west boundary again," he said. "We've been patient with you, but we've got 40 head that need that grass come spring, and we're not waiting another season." "I've told you my position," Marin said. "The deed is recorded in Brackett's Ford. The surveyor's marks are in the ground. You are welcome to look at them. Surveys get wrong sometimes," the bearded one said. "County recorder makes mistakes. Not in this case." The younger one, who'd been quiet, said, "You know what your trouble is, Mrs. Voss. You don't have anybody to listen to reason for you. A woman alone, she gets ideas about what's hers. Gets stubborn about it." He looked around the yard, deliberately, like he was taking inventory. Man around the place might help her think clearer. I stepped out from around the corner of the barn. I had the rifle across my arm. Not aimed, just present. "She's got a man around the place," I said. Both of them looked at me. The younger one's expression shifted, recalculating. "Didn't know Mrs. Voss had hired on," the older one said. His voice had changed some. "She didn't hire me." I looked at him without blinking. "I'm here because I want to be here." "That's a different thing." A silence. The horses shifted. The bearded one looked at Marin, then back at me. He was measuring the distance between us, and doing arithmetic he didn't like the answer to. The boundary question isn't settled, he said. Yes, it is, I said. The deed's recorded. The marks are in the ground. You send a lawyer to Brackett's Ford, he'll tell you the same thing. You come up here again talking about what's yours, we'll have a different conversation. The younger one started to say something. The older one put his hand out without looking at him, and the younger one stopped. Come spring, the older one said, to me. Come spring, I said. I'll be here. They turned their horses and rode out. I watched them until they were over the rise and out of sight. Then I let out a slow breath and lowered the rifle. Marin was still on the porch. I walked over. She was watching where the riders had gone, her jaw set. They'll come back, she said. Maybe. Maybe not. Men like that, they look for the soft place. They didn't find one. She looked at me then, and the thing in her face, I couldn't name it right then, standing in the cold with the breath coming off us both in clouds. She looked at me the way you look at something you weren't sure was real, and are now. You didn't have to do that, she said. I was there, I said. Seemed like the time. She looked at me a moment longer. Then she went inside. I went back to the woodpile. February is a particular kind of suffering. The cold that month was the worst I'd been in since that Colorado winter, which I hadn't thought could be matched. 40 below some mornings. The kind of cold that kills cattle in the field if you leave them out. I moved the cows into the barn in the second week, when the temperature didn't come above 15 for 4 days straight. The barn was warmer, but it was tight and close, and Porter the mule was unhappy about the cows and made his feelings known. The well froze. I spent 2 days with a fire built over the stone cap, thawing it down to where the water would come up, and then built a small shelter over the top of it with stovepipe heat to keep it from freezing again. It worked. Not pretty, but it worked. Marin's older cow, a roan named Bess, who'd been on the farm since before Ebby died, got sick in the second week of February. I'm not a veterinarian, but I've been around cattle enough to know what pneumonia looks like in a cow. I cleaned out a corner of the barn and packed her in with fresh straw, and made sure she had warm water and kept the barn as warm as I could manage. Marin sat up with her 2 nights running. I took the third night, because I could see Marin was running down, though she wouldn't have said so. I sat in the dark of the barn with the cow and the lamp, and listened to her rough breathing. Around 2 in the morning, the breathing began to ease. I put my hand on her neck and she turned her head and looked at me with those dim, patient eyes cows have. By morning, she was on her feet, weak, but eating. When Marin came out at first light, I was at the barn door. She's through it, I said. Marin stopped, looked past me at the cow standing in her corner. Then she sat down on the stoop of the barn and put her hands over her face for a moment. Not crying, just letting something go. I stood there and didn't say anything, because there was nothing to say, and she didn't need me to say it. When she took her hands down, her face was calm again. She looked at me. You stayed with her. Seemed like the thing to do. She stood up. Her eyes were dry. Go inside and get warm, she said. I'll get the morning feeding done. I'm fine. Go inside, Nate. She'd said my name. First time she'd said it just like that, not as a question or a formality, just my name. The way you say a name when you mean the person. I went inside. There was a week in mid-February that I think about still. The storms had been coming every 3 or 4 days, quick and hard, and we'd both gotten used to the rhythm of them. This one came from the north on a Tuesday, and by Tuesday night it was a whiteout. I mean, I couldn't see the barn from the house, not even the lantern in the window I'd left burning. Marin and I sat on opposite sides of the kitchen table, with the fire going and the wind working at the house, like it was trying to find a way in. She had a Bible open on the table, but she wasn't reading it. I was working on a harness repair. One of the driving lines had cracked in the cold, and I was working tallow into the leather to soften it before restitching. Can I ask you something? She said, not looking up from the Bible. You can ask. Why do you keep moving? I kept working the tallow in. Habit, I said. Habit from what? I thought about it. I was a soldier, I said. A long time ago. After that, I was a drover for a few years. And then I just kept going. One place, and then another. Were you looking for something? I set the harness down and looked at my hands. I think I stopped looking a while ago, I said. I think I was just going. She was quiet for a moment. The fire ticked. Ebby used to say the worst thing a man could be was nowhere, she said. He meant in spirit, not in body. He'd met men on the trail who were physically somewhere but their minds were already 50 miles ahead, thinking about the next place. He said those men never got anything built because they couldn't commit to the ground they were standing on. I thought about that. He was right, I said. He usually was, she said. And then, softer. You've been here 4 months, and I haven't once felt like you had your mind somewhere else. I looked up. She was looking at me. I don't, I said. She held my gaze for a moment. Then she looked back down at the Bible. But something had settled in the room. A change in the pressure of it. The way air changes before weather. The storm blew itself out by Thursday. Friday I went out and dug a path from the house to the barn, and the barn to the well, and then widened the yard enough that Marin could move around without wading in thigh-deep snow. The temperature came up to maybe 20 and the sun was out, white and cold on the snow. And the whole place had that stillness that comes after a bad storm, like the world is holding its breath. I was clearing the last of the path when Marin came out of the house. She stood on the porch and looked out at the property, the fences, the barn, the snowfields stretching to the timber on the slope. I stood watching her look at it. There was something in her face that I can only call recognition. The way you look at a thing you thought you might lose, and find you haven't. She came down the steps and walked out to where I was standing. She stopped a few feet away. I want to tell you something, she said. All right. She looked at the ridge for a moment. Then she said, I have been telling myself since October that you were just hired help. That you would leave come spring, and I would manage the way I'd managed before. She paused. I don't think that anymore. I waited. I think you are. I think this is where you are. If you want it to be. She looked at me then, and her eyes were steady and clear. I would like you to stay. Not for the fences or the woodpile. I would like you to stay, because I am tired of being alone in this. And because... She stopped, took a breath. Because I have not felt safe in 3 years, not since Ebby died. And I feel safe with you here. The thing she said last, not because she needed a guard, not because she needed the fences fixed, because she felt safe. A woman like Marin Voss, who could hold a rifle steady on a man's chest at dawn and rebuild a trace chain and keep 40 acres going through 3 winters alone, that woman said she felt safe. With me. I have thought about what to say to that, and I have never quite found the words that are large enough for it. What I did was step toward her, and I put my hands on her face, both of them, and I held her face in my hands, the way you hold something you have been careful with, and can now say, belongs to you. Her eyes didn't waver. She put her hands over mine. I'm not leaving, I said. She nodded, once, and pressed her hands tighter over mine. We stood there in the cold and the bright snowlight for a long moment. Then she said, come inside. Coffee's on. And I followed her in. March came, and the cold started to break. Slow at first, a day in the 20s. Then a day where the temperature hit 30, and the eaves started dripping in the afternoon. The snow didn't go fast, but it started going. The creek opened up at the center first, running black and cold between the white, and then wider. The pasture started to show through in patches. The Alden brothers came back in the 3rd week of March. But this time it was just the older one. And he came alone. And he came slow. I was in the yard when he rode up, and he stopped a good distance out and said, I'd like to talk to Mrs. Voss. I went inside and told Marin. She came out, and I stood at the edge of the porch. The bearded man looked at us both. Whatever arithmetic he'd been doing since January had apparently come out the same way it came out that morning. I've had my own lawyer look at the survey, he said. He says the title's solid. Marin said, I know. I'd like to make an offer on the west boundary grass, a rental, for summer grazing, a fair price. Marin looked at him for a long moment. Come back with the number in writing, she said. We'll consider it. He nodded. Looked at me once more, then turned his horse and went. Slow this time. Not the way a man rides away from something he thinks he'll get. The way a man rides away from something he knows he won't. Marin stood watching until he was gone, then turned to me. We'll consider it. I said. We will, she said. Together. The words sat there between us. Quiet. Exactly right. April came, and the wheat went in. I'd plowed the east field while the ground was still half frozen, and let the frost work the clods apart, and when the temperature held above 30 at night, we planted. Marin moved down the rows with the seed bag, and I worked the drill beside her. It took 3 days. On the evening of the third day, we sat on the porch steps and looked at the turned earth. The last light was going off the ridge, orange and long, and the first meadowlarks had come back to the pasture fence and were singing at each other across the dusk. He was right, Marin said. Who? Ebby. About the ground. You commit to it, it gives back. I looked at the field. 40 acres of turned earth going dark in the evening light. I thought about the 41 years I'd spent moving across ground and leaving nothing in it. I didn't know that before, I said. I know it now. She leaned her shoulder against mine. That was all. We sat there until the light was gone, and the meadowlarks had quieted, and the first stars were coming out over the ridge, and I didn't move, because there was nowhere else I wanted to be. I will tell you what it is to be the man nobody is waiting for, and then to be waited for. It is not a grand thing. It doesn't come with bells. What it comes with is a woman who watches for you to come in from the field and has the coffee on. It comes with waking up in a place that is yours and knowing it, down in your bones, in a way you couldn't have explained to yourself 6 months earlier because you'd never felt it before. It comes with a cracked axe handle that you finally replace one cold April morning because it's your axe handle now, on your farm, and you've got nowhere to be except here. The axe handle I made from an ash branch I'd been curing in the barn all winter. Good straight grain. Heavy. The day I fitted it, I put the first split through a round that had given me trouble for 2 weeks. Hard frozen silver maple, the kind that rings back at you. It went clean. Marin was watching from the porch. Finally, she said. Finally, I said. I set the axe against the stump and went inside for coffee. And behind me the yard was morning lit, the field greening up along the south edge, the fence line straight, the barn solid, the whole of it bearing the shape of work done and kept up and done again, by a man who had finally decided where he stood. That is the whole of it. I was 41 years old and had never once thought I would have anything like this. And then October put me on a piece of ground with a woman who didn't need saving and didn't need flattering and didn't need anything except someone who showed up every morning and did the work and didn't leave. I was that, finally. That turned out to be enough. More than enough.